And welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Right now, here for you along with Zach Muhammad. Zach, we have reached week 7 in the NFL and almost heading towards the back half of October. It's crazy how quick we're going here. We're about halfway through the fantasy football regular season.
Yeah, it's crazy to say, Brett. Obviously, season's flying by. Obviously, as big football fans, we don't want it to go as quick as it has. But we're traveling towards November here, Brett, and really the best time of the year in terms of sports. So football definitely near the top of it right now.
It's been really, really fun watching how quickly it's going, though, just based on the fact of my teams keep winning. And I think that that's probably the most fun part of it. I think that if it was going the other way, it might be a little more of a scramble and a time-consuming thing. But kind of just riding it out right now. Not a lot of trades or anything. Just, let the wins pile up.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, really. I mean, a lot of teams playing really well right now. Really haven't gotten caught in the injury bug too much. I know some of your teams you've kind of fought through it. A lot of my guys have really stayed healthy, so it's I mean, that's always a good sign at the start of each season, Brett.
Yeah, I think that's sort of why we talked about, like, back in our draft preview episodes. Like, it was about trying to make sure you were deep enough on the back end of your roster so that if you do have one of those unexpected injuries, and there have been quite a bit of unexpected injuries this year, I think that you kind of find yourself prepared. And of course, some teams like mine found it where most of your team was injured. You're kind of scrambling. I still feel like I'm coming out of it, but for some reason, guys like Jonathan Taylor, Dallas Goedert, now are sort of in and out of my lineup because like, oh, they're coming back. Never mind. We'll break that all down though as we start to get into the episode, as we get into those matchups. Please subscribe to us on YouTube wherever you get your podcast. Give us a thumbs up. Zach, let's start out with breaking down last night's game. It was the Denver Broncos absolutely trouncing the New Orleans Saints in Sean Payton's return to the Superdome. This was over early, 33-3, I believe it was, and except for the late garbage time touchdown. Just kind of looked like a beatdown. Javonte Williams, 14 carries, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns. Listen, he finished with 26 fantasy points. I know we've talked at length about the running back room in Denver and what it looks like. I think it's fair to say that Javonte probably has solidified his role back as that number one, no doubt, running back.
Yeah, it's positive news for me. Obviously, a dynasty owner of Javonte Williams, and I think right now it's the comeback that he's been on, Brett, from last year to this year. Obviously, he had the knee injury that took him out the season before that, and then they brought him back last year, and some people thought it was maybe even a little bit early. And he was just getting back to his regular self. He wasn't 100%. You could obviously see that last year, but they brought him back so early that you weren't going to get a 100% Javonte. So when you look at it now, he had a full offseason after already being back on the field. And I mean, the big thing is you see the lateral quickness that he has now, Brett, just breaking through tackles, but also his shiftiness around the defensive backs and linebackers that are coming at him. It's just a different Javonte Williams. And I think right now, Brett, like he is creeping into that running back 2 territory right now, although it's a tough system to play in Denver based on you just don't know what's going to happen each game for the Broncos. Javonte Williams is a bright spot right now for fantasy owners in Denver. And like you look at what he was able to do yesterday and almost getting to 100 yards, plus his involvement in the passing games, and then he was able to get into the end zone. I'm not going to take too much out of it because New Orleans was a really, really good matchup for Javonte based on all the injuries. But I mean, it is a very positive sign if you drafted Javonte. Brett, we're talking about a guy who was going like 9th or 10th round this year. Like he's been a steal from that standpoint of it.
Yeah, and I just think like that's one of those potential league winners. And even so, I think like the guy still can be had if you are one of those teams that needs a little bit of running back depth. I don't know that it even costs that much to go out and get a Javonte, even with a positive outlook right now on this, because you're not going to have to give up the moon for a guy like that. He's still not in like the upper echelon, but a great depth option, a great flex option, running back 2 moving forward to complete your lineup, I should say.
Yeah, Brett, and on the other side, I'm gonna ask you: Are you freaking out right now if you're an Alvin Kamara owner? It's kind of hard. Obviously, Derek Carr will be back in the next couple of weeks, but even so, like this offensive line is just beat to shreds, Brett. Right now, they're nothing right now.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, listen, I think that it was a little bit notable that when you take a look at the carry numbers, he only had 7 carries in this. And I think that sort of had to do with the game script a bit, but only 10 yards on the carries. Like you said, it just sort of would break down pretty immediate. Kendre Miller had 1 less carry than he did, was able to do more with it for 36 yards. And then Rattler ends up having 5 carries for 34 yards. So, when Kamara got the ball, it seemed like the defense knew what was coming. And they kind of quickly got away from that. One of the things that I did notice, though, was he still got 7 targets. And so that part of his game isn't going to go away. And so from the PPR standpoint, like you're still going to get those points. It's just about, his offensive line isn't that great. And so we just sort of need that Kamara magic where he gets those, big target games and lots of catches. That's going to be how you kind of get your cheap points. And we talked about that a bit last year, that Kamara was one of those players that basically can get you points because he's just going to keep getting catches and, in PPR standard formats, like that's where his bread and butter was. And that's kind of what rose him up to have a high floor no matter what the case was. In a game script like this, like he still has a high floor because he's still going to get the ball in traffic. The thing I was most curious about was who was going to take over as the number 1 receiver. And obviously with Olave out, with Rashid Shaheed, which we'll talk about in just a minute, I think that it really was telling that, everybody was pointing at Bub Means to be the guy. Bub Means didn't really do much. Bub Means only had 5 targets, 3 catches for 37 yards. Ends up getting out-tapped, I believe, by Cedric Wilson Jr., who ends up getting the bulk of the targets. Mason Tipton as well, getting 6 catches each. Tipton, it looked like he had 45 yards on 9 targets, and Cedric Wilson with 57 yards on 7 targets. So, Bub Means obviously very new on the scene. Certainly one that the Dynasty community has been looking just based on his name. And I remember when he got picked in our draft, like the whole room erupted just because of the name. But I just think there's got to be more here for New Orleans. And I still think we don't really know who the guy is going to be outside of Chris Olave.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Wilson's, a lot of his stuff came in on the last drive. It was really garbage time.
Yeah.
Where he got a lot of his stuff, ended up getting the touchdown as well in the end. The last thing on this game, Brett, is Courtland Sutton, who, I mean, we talk about it as like, all right, yeah, he's maybe a flex option each and every week. Brett, not even a target in this one. Like I understand when people are like, oh, well, game script, they were ahead the entire game. I understand that. He's their top wide receiver, and you had Troy Franklin, you had Vele, you had Kroll, the tight end for Denver, all getting targets in the end, even though they were up so much. Courtland Sutton, not even 1 target. So I look at that and say, it's just one of those, and that's why he is a flex option and not a reliable target each and every week. But, I mean, you could then, as a Sutton owner, look to next week. They play Carolina, so maybe a time for a bounce back for him. But, I mean, not even a target, for your number one wide receiver was just a little bit crazy in my mind, Brett.
I think that, I was thrilled when I saw that I didn't start him, when I remembered that I didn't start him in my lineup. He was a flex consideration, and he should be because he's the number one option. But yeah, I think that it was a bad matchup, as we have said time and time again, of players who go up against New Orleans defense. It's tough. The secondary is good. And yes, they just got the week before by Baker Mayfield, but it's still a tough matchup. It always has been, especially when you're in that dome. Like, number one receiver, it's been really, really hard for them to generate anything. So yeah, it's one game. I'm going to sort of just brush aside, but I thought that it was weird that he didn't even get a single look.
Yeah, definitely fair. On to a lot of news from this past week, Brett. Yeah.
Yeah. Last thing I just want to talk about briefly, Troy Franklin. I think that, the impact that we got from Troy Franklin with him not getting the ball, with Sutton not getting the ball, that is telling. It is a guy that you should have had on your radar from the get-go. I think that obviously he's a rookie, getting more comfortable with Bo Nix. Obviously, we know about the chemistry, the camaraderie with them being teammates. So just think it's sort of a guy that I would keep on my radar moving forward, especially if it's a trend that continues, into next week with Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, definitely fair.
All right, Zach. So let's break down some of the big news here. And we start out with what was the biggest news of this week, and that was that Davante Adams is now a New York Jet. Zach, a lot to take away here. First, let's start out with the Davante impact, and then we can kind of go into the rest of those guys. I think that the value here doesn't totally change from going from the Raiders to the Jets. I still think he's obviously like number one option, and yeah, it's going to be a little bit different having a number two option being Garrett Wilson as opposed to Jacoby Myers. So he might get a couple more targets, but I really don't think that that's going to have an effect on Davante. Fire him up. I think that really was a move that we thought was coming for a while, and even dating back into last year when we started to hear rumblings that this could be a possibility. I think that for me, this is one of those guys that if you're a contender in Dynasty, like now you can go and be confident to go out and trade him, put your team over the top.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Davante, it's pretty much still a top 18 or so wide receiver. They're both in really the top 18, him and Garrett Wilson. I think when you look at what this trade does for the Jets, it gives Aaron Rodgers a lot more weapons, and yes, it may increase Rodgers' value just a little bit, but even so, I think with the non-existent rushing of Aaron Rodgers, it still has his value a little bit down. He's going to need to throw the ball a lot to really even get on the radar of a quarterback one in a redraft league, in a 10-team league. He's still going to need a lot more passing if he wants to get there. But even so, I think when you look at what this does for the Jets, it's big time for them. It gives him a really solid weapon, and a guy who he's known very well throughout his career. And it also spreads out some more room for Garrett Wilson, who most likely versus every team was going to get either doubled or just pressured a lot. And for that reason, now Davante being there, they have to separate a defense and focus one-on-one and in man coverage. That's where Davante Adams really excels, Brett. So something to really look at in the next couple of weeks and for the rest of this season. I think Adams, yeah, he's in that top 18 value of like redraft. And for Dynasty, it's somebody to try and look at, because if you're going for it, he's a guy who's going to get his targets. He's going to get his points. And it's a guy who hasn't been getting his points because of the situation in Vegas. So when you look at it in the end, it's going to be a good trade for the Jets, most likely, to bring in Adams and pair him with Rodgers. And if you're an Adams owner in redraft and Dynasty, you're probably pretty excited that finally you're going to get a better version of Davante Adams than we've seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, for Rodgers, you're talking about somebody who's more on the lower end quarterback too, but certainly a super flex start. I think that based on the weapons he has right now, and we talk about Mike Williams' potential that he gets traded and all of that, but for the moment, he still has all these weapons. I think you upgrade him. I think that he becomes one of those higher end quarterback twos now. And yes, he still doesn't have the rushing ability, but I just think, like you said, defenses are going to have to split up. Essentially, they have to put themselves in a spot where you're playing your second best defender on a guy who could be a wide receiver one elsewhere, Garrett Wilson. And so, yeah, I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for Garrett. I think that I probably peg both of them as high end wide receiver twos. I don't know that this affects Brees Hall because I still think that that's going to open up the run a bit more now because teams are going to have to back to try to play against Devontae and Garrett and obviously focus on them. So I think it actually helps Brees. So he's still, set it and forget it, running back one. And then I think that the only real guy who takes a hit here is Alan Lazard. And it's, you know what? I don't know that we were looking at him that highly anyway. He was a flex option. Like he was on my ones to watch, and that's great. But I don't know that we were going to say he was ever going to get to that next level. And obviously, this Devontae move knocks him down quite a bit. Where it kind of looks like it's going to be the Devontae and Garrett Wilson show. Tyler Conklin, same thing. Like he was a borderline tight end one, very low end tight end one, high end two. I think it becomes more of a streaming option now moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, definitely fair. I think when you look at the drop that Lazard gets, it's because there's two top guys there, and you kind of I think the closest comparison that we have is really Philadelphia, Brett. When you look at AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, I think it's just in that range of guys. When you look at it, the third guy usually is nowhere to be found. I mean, they have Jahan Dotson right now, and we haven't even talked about Jahan Dotson since preseason. He was traded in between then to go from Washington to Philadelphia. But like those guys don't really get too much. I think when you look at the relationship that Lazard has with Rodgers, he may get some targets here and there, but nothing enough for fantasy value. And I think it's a good thing for Brees Hall here, Brett. I think when you open up the middle a little bit more, send the defenses out wide a little bit more to focus on those two guys on either side of Aaron Rodgers and Wilson and Adams, it could open some run lanes for Brees Hall. So the offense is in a better spot. We'll see. Obviously, we'll preview this week's game. We'll see if it turns out a good sign for the New York Jets for weeks to come.
Jumping to the next trade that happened just a few hours later. In the same division, though, Amari Cooper traded to the Buffalo Bills. Zach, I think that this one has more of a fantasy impact just because of the knocks against everybody else in that Bills offense. Amari Cooper, I think, is right now a wide receiver one. We don't know about his week 7 status. When Sean McDermott was asked earlier today about it, he said, we'll see. I mean, I would think so, but I want to see and I want to visit with the coaches again. That report coming from ESPN. But I mean, there's been outlets out there that are saying he's ready to go and he's going to play, and we'll see what happens. But when he does get in there and he's at full speed, I think that this becomes the sure number one guy. I think to the Stephon Diggs era, where he was this set it and forget it wide receiver one, I think that Cooper has the potential to be that this year, for the rest of this year, I should say. James Cook, I think, doesn't take a knock, though, because I still think that in the same way that I just said about Brees Hall, about spreading the field, I think that bringing Amari Cooper, a guy who can go deep, it sort of will allow James Cook to be in a little bit more open space. I also think Dalton Kincaid stays at the same. You're still playing him. The biggest knock for me right now comes down to the right receiver room, though. Khalil Shakir, who looked like, okay, this is a really good flex option each and every week. Potential that he creeps into your wide receiver 2 in some weeks. He goes down to like a wide receiver 4 or 5 now. And I think that he's the depth option for me. Coleman, same thing. Curtis Samuel's probably not even on rosters anymore. I think that's sort of the ship has sailed, and it's sort of that hit or miss, boom or bust kind of thing. This is a big boost for Josh Allen, though. Not that he needed to be boosted much more. He's already kind of at the top, but this is a big boost now because it's a nice target that he can have. Guy who can come down with the ball, short yardage, long yardage. I think that Amari Cooper's been able to do it all, and obviously we've seen now him get traded quite a few times in the NFL, and these are teams that wanted to go out and get him. And so I think, once again, Bills have a number one receiver, and so that's sort of how I see the values going. Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think I somewhat agree with you when it comes to the wide receivers. I still think Shakir, based on the fact that he plays in the slot and he is a slot receiver in the end, I don't think there is a crazy dip. I think he's still in a flex option range, maybe in a wide receiver 4 range, but I still think he has value in fantasy. He's not a guy that you're all of a sudden dropping because Amari Cooper comes in. He is in a range where, yeah, if something's going on, good matchup, like he's a solid flex option. I do think Cooper is going to get targets as well. Of course, I think he's going to get peppered with targets from Josh Allen, but even so, they have some weapons there. And what's to say a defense can't just zone in on Amari Cooper and force the other guys to beat them? Because when you look at Buffalo so far this season, I don't think it's been really any of the wide receivers or even Dalton Kincaid at tight end. It's just been a mix of everybody. And from that standpoint, plus the fact, of course, that James Cook, when he's in the lineup, really is rolling. It's Josh Allen, whoever he's feeling that day. So it is a very nice increase for Amari Cooper based on what he had in Cleveland, because he had pretty much next to nothing in terms of his fantasy value and rising and dipping. Like it was in a horrible spot. But then you look at Cooper now and you say, all right, probably still in a wide receiver like 23, 24 kind of range, Brett. But I don't know if I could put him higher than that just yet. I still think there's options there in Buffalo. I still think they could rely on the run game as well. So I may be proved wrong, but it's more of a wait and see just before I pull the plug on anything just yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that even the Bill staff is looking at waiting and seeing, and they might give him a week. So, monitor the reports, and obviously Sunday morning when it comes, monitor the inactive list and whether or not they give him a go. Zach, just quickly, I want to bring to you some breaking news here. The 49ers have announced Jawan Jennings is out this weekend. Jordan Mason is full go, and they will also activate Ricky Purcell after he was shot earlier in the preseason. And so great news there for them with Purcell coming back. Rookie, obviously we talk at length about him. We will talk about him a little bit more later when we get to the 49ers matchup. All right, let's jump right into the next news here. Rashid Shaheed officially has underwent a full repair of his meniscus, and he's been ruled out for the 2024 season. Zach, I mean, we kind of talked about it, just who is going to be the other guy there with Olave. And I mean, it kind of has to be Kamara, but as far as the Shaheed owners, like this was just not good news.
Yeah, of course. And another wide receiver down, Brett. Obviously a one that's out for the season now in Rashid Shaheed. And it's a painful one for owners in fantasy, and obviously for Shaheed himself. Like when you look at the Saints, and you could say, well, the season right now, it looks like it's going nowhere. Derek Carr would be back in looks like just a couple weeks, Brett. So when you look at that, Olave is going to get an increase in targets. But I also think when you look at yesterday, even though it was Rattler in the game, I think when Carr comes back in, he's going to go to a experienced weapon. And could that be a Cedric Wilson? Could that also be the tight end in Juwan Johnson? Like those guys will get maybe a bit of an increase and get some more targets in the passing game, because they can't always go to Kamara and they cannot always go to Chris Olave, and they'll have to figure things out in New Orleans. But I think those two guys are couple just to keep on the radar. But obviously a big blow to Shaheed. And if you're a dynasty owner, just hang on to him and hope for better things next season. He's still young. I think he's either 26 or 27. He's in that range, so still a lot of time as a wide receiver, and definitely somebody worth keeping right now in a solid enough offense in New Orleans. I can't hear you, Brett. Actually, is your mic?
We're muted. Sorry, we were muted. I think that as far as Shaheed goes, if you are a dynasty owner of him, you're going to want to keep him. And obviously, he is still young. I think he is 26. And so, you're going to want to keep him on your team. It is a guy that you probably went out and got last year, becoming a deep threat in the NFL. And so, I wouldn't really do anything. Just stash him. And, if you have an IR spot, then that works too. And most dynasty teams do. And so just keep him there and, kind of just go on until next year and we'll come back and we'll see what exactly the quarterback situation is because, there's have been cries for Derek Carr and what happens in the draft. And we'll see what happens. I think that New Orleans is in an interesting spot in this upcoming off season, I should say, with all to go around them and whether they can continue to surround talent around the quarterback and then get a quarterback. Because we've obviously been crying for Derek Carr to be out for quite a while, and most of the fans of New Orleans have been doing the same. Zach, Nick Chubb is expected to play in Week 7. Huge news. What is the impact, though, going forward on Jerome Ford?
Yeah, I mean, Jerome Ford is week to week right now, so he's going to be out anyways, most likely. It's going to be Nick Chubb and Pierre Strong in the backfield. I think when you look at Nick Chubb, just the story of being where he is now, very, very awesome story in the end. Obviously had his injury history, had one at Georgia that he didn't know if he was going to ever come back to play football. And how about doing it again, Brett, in the NFL now? And he's back and he's healthy again. I think when you look at what the Browns outlook on him is basically their team stinks flat out right now. So the thing in my mind when you look at Nick Chubb is they're going to ease him in, and that would be the smart thing to do. At least just ease him in, and that may be all right. He gets 10 snaps, 15 snaps in this one. I wouldn't be in the range just yet of starting Nick Chubb, Brett, because I just think this offense is going through so much right now that it's more of, okay, get this guy back into a football game, see how he's doing, make him look a little healthy once again. But when you look at it, it's going to be eased back in my mind, for Nick Chubb. I think when you look at the injury history overall, this is a guy who's freakishly talented at football, and they want him to be 100% healthy before really putting him into full risk. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So it could be a couple weeks. But for those who have Nick Chubb, man, you're looking towards the next couple weeks or so, and you say, all right, well, I had another guy in Nick Chubb who could be right now a flex option, I would say, Brett, just until you fully see him ease back into full health.
I agree. I think that you got to start him out as a flex option right now. Just because I think Donta Foreman, Pierre Strong are both going to get some work here. Moving forward, I'm not sure that we're going to see it full go Nick Chubb where he's getting 20 carries right out of the gate. But yeah, very cool story. Just, the road to recovery. And we've talked about year after year, there's some guy who comes from a major injury. Last year, it was Aaron Rodgers, who looked like he was going to maybe play at the end of the year. I mean, just in sports in general, I think back to Derrick Rose, and we were like, okay, well, Derrick Rose is never going to play basketball again. And then that comeback happened, and he came back very quickly. And so, yeah, the injury was gross. Just, if you haven't seen the play, don't go look for it. It was gross. And it's just kind of miraculous how he's going to play this weekend.
Yeah, really, really cool in the end.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into our standouts from last week. Zach, we got to start out with Chris Godwin. He had a major game, 11 catches, 125 yards, 2 touchdowns, finished with 35.5 standard PPR points. I think that for me, Chris Godwin sort of has solidified himself back in as that number 2 option. And if Mike Evans can't go, that number 1 option for Baker.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, he's almost towards that number 1 option just based on the amount of targets that he gets and making him that possession type of wide receiver. I think the worry always was maybe like touchdowns. That would basically separate a guy like Godwin versus Evans. Evans, it seems that he always finds the end zone, and even on less targets and less receptions, he still just does more with it in the end. When it comes to Godwin, like he's getting the targets plus the touchdowns. So from that standpoint, you're feeling really good if you're a Godwin owner, and you look at what he's been able to do in the last couple of weeks or so. Like he is he's probably a top 10 receiver in fantasy right now, Brett. A must start every week, and just another really, really good week that he had against New Orleans. And he gets a solid enough matchup this week against Baltimore, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's also, should be noted, Mike Evans dealing with some hamstring issues right now. Practice limited session over the last couple of days. So, yeah, I think that maybe it had an effect in the middle of that game, and that's sort of why Chris Godwin just kind of took over as the but moving forward, obviously, we'll have to monitor what's going on with Mike Evans.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so from the wide receiver room to the running back room, Sean Tucker takes our other standout of last week. 4 carries, 136 yards, and a touchdown. Zach, this is a guy who literally came out of nowhere, made some highlight reel plays over in Syracuse, looked like he was going to be a top-end talent, and then it comes out that he has heart issues, and they did a lot of testing on his heart during the combine, basically fell off everybody's boards, goes undrafted, signs with Tampa Bay. Listen, it was a dynasty target for a lot of people, heading into the draft process. Then when he went undrafted, kind of went by the wayside. Now I think he's sort of back on that radar. Quickly scooped up in a lot of dynasty leagues this past week. But 14 carries, 136 yards. I mean, now we're sort of in the spot where is he going to get a ride moving forward as this 3-headed monster? Todd Bowles said yes. I'm not sure how much I buy it, how much I believe it, but it certainly was interesting for him to come out and say that right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think it was more of like a could be based on how it was. He was very proud of Sean Tucker and just making the most of his opportunities and how well he played with his limited opportunities. But you saw in the end, like the snaps favored Bucky Irving, like not even close to Sean Tucker. It was just Tucker made the most of his touches, like I said, Brett. So in the end, when you look at it, like it could be a 3-man backfield. I would say they're going to go back to their traditional of Bucky Irving getting the rushing touches, and Rachaad White, if healthy and in the lineup, will get the receiving back touches. Sean Tucker is a very good third option, though, that they have. And it could be a dynasty stash, definitely a guy to just hold on to just in case one of those guys goes down. Like, that Sean Tucker is a guy right there, like that they could rely on, Brett. Obviously, just what he was able to do in this one against New Orleans, like big time stuff. And of course, a shout out to Syracuse, New York, not far from us. So really, really cool story that he was able to come back and what a breakout game for Sean Tucker in the end.
Yeah, also should be noted he had 3 catches for 56 yards and a score. And yeah, getting it down, on the ground and in the air. So yeah, I just think it's sort of interesting. Obviously, we talk about Bucky Irving, we talk about Rachaad White. Rachaad White sort of trending down in this backfield, and it's obviously been talked about the last couple of weeks. He is limited this week, and so we'll see what happens as far as him coming out. And the final injury report comes out tomorrow for their game, and so we'll see where he lands, and that'll sort of determine whether or not Sean Tucker should be in your lineup. So all eyes are on that. Zach, let's get to our last standout here. It is Joe Mixon, who in a 41-21 win played a big part. 13 carries, 101 or 102 yards and a score. Also had 2 catches for 30 yards and a score. Finished with 27.2 PPR points. Zach, I think this was another great game for Joe Mixon. And, a couple weeks ago we saw him with the injury. We weren't exactly sure who the number one guy was going to be. Cam Akers, Ogunbowale. Joe Mixon finally comes back and takes the reins.
Yeah, I mean, and as a Mixon owner myself, how good is it to have Joe Mixon back? I mean, just a guy who's been so consistent year after year, as long as he's stayed healthy. And yeah, the injury bug hit him to start this year a bit, but he comes back at his first game, no problem at all. And I think that's credit to the Houston Texans, who, I mean, they could have brought him back, Brett, within a couple games. They wanted to make sure that he was 100%. Obviously, they were winning games in the meantime, but to make sure that his ankle was in tip-top shape so he could come back. And, I mean, he didn't even get the full amount of touches in this one, Brett. But what a performance by Joe Mixon, and what a comeback that he made in this one from the injuries just a couple of weeks before. But a really solid option, a really strong like RB2 who's really in the low end RB1 train right now, Brett, with how much he's making the most of the opportunities he gets. And they've made him a clear cut running back one, a low end running back one in Houston, as long as he stays healthy.
Definitely fair. Zach, let's jump into our game previews here. As we start out, New England, they travel to Jacksonville, or actually they travel to London to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Zach, it's going to be Drake May. It looks like Drake May should be good to go no matter what heading into this game. And so where do we place him? Do we place him in that super flex range, or are you staying away still?
I think based on the matchup, you could. It just depends on your roster options. If he's around there, then Jacksonville is obviously really as good as it gets in terms of how poor their defense has been so far this season, Brett. And I think this is a classic like Thursday night type of game that's taking place in London. I think back even we're talking Denver, New Orleans before. I'm thinking back to like Mariota versus Bortles on a random Thursday night. Like New England against Jacksonville in London is pretty it's pretty awful. So in this matchup, you're not going to expect too much from a lot of guys here. I think when you look at the running backs and receivers in the room, if Ramondre is healthy, obviously we still have to wait and see on that. Then he's in. If he's not, I don't even know if I'm trusting a guy like Antonio Gibson. But in the end, when you look at the other side of it, you have Jacksonville, who's been struggling mightily. You don't even know what the situation is at running back with ETN questionable right now with injury, is a game time decision in the end. If he can't go, maybe Tank Bigsby gets a flex consideration, Brett. Just based on how poor this New England defense has been. And you saw Joe Mixon run all over them last week. Tank Bigsby could be a solid flex option. But if ETN's in, I don't know how I could trust really either one of these guys right now. Of course, there's going to be people that have to put ETN in, and I understand it. But he's been just god-awful so far this season, Brett. I won't feel too confident in it. And the rest of the guys, it's Ingram and Brian Thomas as well. And then maybe Christian Kirk gets some flex consideration as well.
Yeah. So for me, I think that on the Patriots side of things, like you said, Drake May, it kind of depends on your options. He did use his legs And so I think that, he does have the potential to get higher than that. But certainly a super flex option for me. Ramondre, we'll see what happens with him as far as the status goes moving forward. He is questionable heading into this game. If he does not play, I'm not as confident in Antonio Gibson. And it really comes down to he didn't really do anything last week, and he had the lead role, 13 carries and not a lot to go with it. And so for me, I'm kind of just staying away from that. Ja'Lynn Polk, I think this is a week where Ja'Lynn Polk can kind of assert himself with Drake May moving forward. Pop Douglas, I think, though, is going to be the number one guy, and he is a flex option for me just based on the potential target share that he has in this offense. Kind of staying away from everybody else, though, and it's that wait and see approach with Drake May as he gets more comfortable. And then, on the other side of the ball, like Trevor Lawrence right now, he's a super flex option, but you can't put him in a one quarterback league, especially with New England. Like the defense is still pretty tough this year to play against. Tank Bigsby right now probably is a start if ETN can't go. So yeah, keep an eye on that. Otherwise, you're rolling ETN in there, and then like you said, Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk, like. I'm not as confident because the offense sort of has been going up and down the entire year in the roller coaster ride. The guy who I am confident in, though, is Evan Ingram, and you're definitely playing him in your lineup.
Yeah, definitely fair.
All right, so let's jump to our next matchup here. Miami at Indianapolis. Zach, looks like Anthony Richardson is good to go no matter what, but a guy who is ruled out is Jonathan Taylor. So what do you think the impact is with the running game for the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, and it really comes down to the health of Sermon in the end. He's questionable. You got Goodson there as well. I don't know if I could truly trust somebody there. Like it could be a flex option, one of the other two guys based on if they're playing. But with Taylor out, obviously you really look at Anthony Richardson now, Brett, coming back. Like when you look at it, could he take a lot of the runnings and take a lot of the carries in the end? I think that could be the focus for Indianapolis this week and letting Anthony Richardson kind of do his thing. They're going up against Miami, who obviously still without Tua. They're just kind of going through it right now. And obviously coming off the bye week, maybe they're a little bit well rested, but I feel like for Indianapolis, you're kind of just picking based on just your options in your lineup. And I think in the end, that'll make the decision a lot easier. The rest of the guys, Michael Pittman, I think is questionable right now, Brett. And then you look at Josh Downs, who's also questionable. So those guys are also, if they're playing, they're flex options right now. And it's just based on Richardson has not been a great passer so far this year. However, the possibility now that without Taylor in his backfield, without some of his options, he may have to throw it to some of those guys in Downs and Pittman, and maybe they get some more targets in the end. But that's really about it for Indianapolis as kind of a one of those kind of snooze fest type of games between Indianapolis and Miami this week.
Yeah, I think for the Colts, it's, listen, I think Sermon actually was ruled or he was removed from the injury report, so he will be good to go. So for me, he becomes a flex option, but I can't put him at anything more than that. Tyler Goodson, kind of just put him on the radar as well. You're really just kind of starting Pittman here. And Josh Downs, I think, probably is a flex option for me. I'm not going to throw any of those other guys in there, Pierce, CD Mitchell, etc. Richardson right now, he is a super flex option. I don't know that you can put him in right away just because we've seen inconsistency of him in the last couple of weeks when he wasn't injured. And so now the first back, I'm not sure that I'm as confident. On the other side of the ball, Miami, it's an interesting case because Tyreek kind of falls into the 20s as far as his ranking goes, and he kind of deserves it based on quarterback play. that said, Tyler Huntley is a super flex option, probably a lower end at that, and it really just comes down to the legs and whether he can use his legs against the Colts. Achane, you're rolling him out there. Mostert becomes a flex option as well, based on what like on your team, and if you have to put somebody in, like I feel like Mostert is a guy who can fall into the end zone at any given time. Wild flex for me, and it really comes down to the quarterback play as well. And I'm staying away from Johnny Smith.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it also, when you look at the matchup, like it's a good one this week, Brett. I mean, they're going up against Indianapolis. Their defense, their secondary has been terrible so far this year. So it could be a sign for a solid enough output from some of those guys. But yeah, it's really a guessing game right now with Miami based on the quarterback situation. So based on your roster, you kind of decide from there.
All right, so now we go and move along to our next matchup, Tennessee at Buffalo. Zach, we talked at the top of the show about Amari Cooper going this week. If Amari Cooper can't go, are you starting any of those receivers?
Yeah, I mean, if Shakir is healthy and playing, I think he still has flex consideration as would be the number one guy in there. And then you look at, obviously, Kincaid is going to be in your lineup at tight end. If you don't have one of those other top guys. But I feel like your main guys here in Shakir and Kincaid, as well as James Cook and of course Josh Allen, like that's really going to be the Buffalo offense this week. And just figuring out a way to grab a win at home against Tennessee, who's been pretty mediocre on defense based on their standards so far this year, Brett.
I think that, as far as the Bills offense goes, it's kind of just that start your guys kind of a thing. Khalil Shakir included in that. And obviously, if Cooper does go, it does take a bump to Shakir's value, though. And I think that in the same way that we're talking about some of these other guys like Garrett Wilson, who now are going to be able to free up the field, and James Cook and, Breece Hall, we talked about sort of free them up. Having that, I think the same goes for Shakir. Shakir plays over the middle, like you said, and so maybe a draw corner or a safety outside a little bit more with Amari Cooper there opens up some space for Shakir. So we could see a couple big boom plays on that side. Listen, I don't have a ton of confidence on Tennessee's side. It's just, it's been doom and gloom, and we talked to Will Levis about Will Levis at length this week, and we saw a dynasty trade go down where Will Levis got moved in a trade where Kirk Cousins was acquired. He hasn't been that great. There's a lot of people screaming for Mason Rudolph to come in as the second guy behind him. I think the sky would officially fall if that were the case. And obviously, listen, Will Levis wasn't a first-round pick. He was picked with that top pick of the second round. So we can't really peg him as a first-round pick. But this was a guy who was talked about going in the top 5 in his draft year. And it just hasn't worked out. I think it partly has to do with the room that's around him. But we're really excited about this room heading into this year. And so it is partly on the quarterback. I don't know that we can totally blame the talent around him. The talent around him hasn't done anything because of what the quarterback is letting them do. So, yeah, I think that it's a longer conversation that could be had. That said, he's a low-end super flex for me this week. I don't know that I can put him higher. Obviously, tough matchup playing in Buffalo against that defense that has just been riddled with injuries, and yet it doesn't matter because the Bills' defense is still, still real tough to play against, especially at home. I think that the only guy I can really start with any sort of confidence is Tony Pollard.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I was going to say that, and I'm staying away from Calvin Ridley because although you saw the target share last week, it still turned into 0 receptions in the end, Brett. So when you look at it, I'll say Tony Pollard is going up against the one of the worst run defenses in the NFL this year. And that comes down to Buffalo's had a lot of injuries, but even so, like they've just struggled on defense and to contain the run. So Pollard's a really solid option this week and an RB2, but nobody else I'm really trusting on Tennessee this week.
All right, so let's jump to the next matchup. And it's a pretty good segue here. Cincinnati at Cleveland. Zach, what's the impact without Amari Cooper here for the Cleveland Browns?
I think when you look at it, they're going to have Jerry Jeudy getting a lot more involved, Brett. I think when you look at just what he was able to do with Amari Cooper in the lineup, and now without Amari Cooper, like they're going to get this passing game a little bit figured out when it comes to Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku. I think those two guys are the only guys I'm really considering in a lineup this week. I'm not even considering like any of the running backs because I know that Nick Chubb will get his touches. And some people may say, oh, well, I don't have a choice and I have to put Nick Chubb as a flex. Understandable. You hope he falls into the end zone and they try and get him into the end zone or something like that. But even so, like, I think it's Jeudy and Njoku, and that's pretty much it right now in terms of Cleveland guys, Brett.
Yeah, I just looked. Elijah Moore is out there in 99% of leagues, which is crazy as a number 2 receiver. But that's just kind of what's going on right now with Cleveland. I don't know if you can be super confident in anybody out there. Obviously, like Jerry Jeudy, yes, he is going to be the de facto number 1 until they're not. I just don't know that I can really trust anybody, though. And yes, the running game is going to be this sort of monster. It's almost like it reminds me of last year in Denver, where it was like, okay, well, they have Sutton and they have Jerry Jeudy there, but really they're going to lean into this 3-headed monster that is their backfield. And that was kind of what they did. You know, it was like P. Ryan one week, and then it was McLaughlin another week, and then it was Javonte another week. And so I think we kind of can see the same thing here, with Chubb and Don Foreman and Pierre Strong as well. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of what we're going to see going forward. I have no confidence in the quarterback going forward. And obviously, like, if they put Jameis in, then that becomes a whole different story, and we'll have a different conversation next week. Guy that I am just kind of keeping on the radar is Cedric Tillman. And it really comes down to Dynasty community loved him for a long time since he came into the league. And so, I mean, there is the potential now of an opportunity, him basically being the number 3 receiver there. And whether he can snatch the opportunity or not to go higher remains to be seen. But, just kind of keeping my eye on that one. Real deep ad option right now, though.
Yeah, definitely a fair one. And on the other side for Cincinnati, the big question right now is Zach Moss or Chase Brown, Brett. I think when you look at just the back and forth that's been going on, it looks like Chase Brown maybe has the advantage after Zach Moss fumbled last week, but like we just don't know. And I think you kind of pick and choose. I think I would be more confident in starting a Chase Brown this week. However, Cleveland's run defense has been like under the radar, really good. I think when you look at their matchups in the past, like their secondaries really struggled, which is usually where they've been really good in recent years. But now it's their run defense that looks really strong so far, and they've held running backs to a limited amount of yards in certain games this year. So I would say Chase Brown is the one that I'd go with. And then, of course, you're starting your main guys of Burrow, Chase, and Higgins this week. And a matchup in Cleveland, which you expect that the Cincinnati Bengals would kind of feed off of their win last week against the Giants on Sunday Night Football to really get this team going. I mean, sitting at 2-4, a little bit unexpected right so far to start the year, but they still have a lot of games left to figure things out right now, and they'll trust those league guys to do so.
Yeah, I think for me, as far as the running back room goes, I think I put Chase Brown just a tad for Zach Moss, where Zach Moss is more of a flex option for me. But it's close. I think that, we've sort of seen that 1-2 split that we thought we might see, 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it. Like, I think that is still good. And both of those guys have become pretty good options. It should be noted that both guys weren't exactly healthy coming into last week. Chase Brown was banged up. And so the snap count, early on looked like it was going in Zach Moss's favor. Then it kind of evened out as the game went on. So, yeah, I don't read into it too much. I think that these guys are real close. They're both good options. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, like you're putting them in no matter what. Josevac, I think, has taken a bit of a dip in the last couple of weeks from what he was at the start of the season. So I'm stashing him, but I'm not playing him. And then I think Mike Gesicki has sort of just fallen off the radar completely in the last couple of weeks since T. Higgins came back. And so I think he's probably a drop candidate at this point. And Joe Burrow, you run him out there, and the Browns defense has been not that great. Like, they've been hit and miss. And so I think this is an opportunity for Joe Burrow to, again, cement himself as the mayor of Ohio.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so we jump to our next game here, Houston at Green Bay. Zach, Jordan Love's a pretty good quarterback, huh?
Yeah, I mean, what a player he is. And Green Bay, obviously, really happy to have him back and healthy and feeling good. And they get a good enough matchup here against the secondary that's been okay to start the year, but definitely one of the teams that Houston's defense that you saw last year, and you said, all right, well, it could be trending towards the top defense. They've been hit or miss so far this season. So it is a good matchup for Love, and he's going to have his top guys there. And I think they're going to be passing a lot, obviously, with Jaden Reed available and Romeo Doubs available. I think when we look at the Packers right now, it looks like Doubs has kind of taken that number 2 job as the number 2 wide. Of course, you got Tucker Kraft there as well at tight end, who's really stepped up so far this season. But I think when you look at Doubs, he's trending into a flex status kind of play. And that's okay right now with what's going on in Green Bay and just based on the health of Jordan Love. And I think they also are getting Josh Jacobs involved, and that's been good for them so far this season. You still expect a little bit more if you're a Jacobs owner, but he's just putting up solid enough RB2 numbers. So those 4 guys are really like on my radar. The main 4 of Reed, Kraft. You also have guys like Jacobs and Love, but also the flex status of a guy like Romeo Doubs this week.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts. I'm just looking, and Dontavian Wicks was officially listed as questionable, and so yeah, like we were talking about the last couple of weeks, he's gone down in obviously the rankings just based on there's so many guys to feed there. But certainly, a guy that in a week where there's still a lot of bye weeks that are out there and whatnot, monitor his status in some of those deeper leagues moving forward. On the other side of the ball, I think it's kind of just start your guys, like we say each and every week. Joe Mixon, CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Dalton Schultz. Xavier Hutchinson, I thought was going to have a little bit more of an impact just based on the injury that we saw last week and him getting the opportunity. Didn't really get that. And so, I'm kind of just holding course on Xavier Hutchinson, keeping him out there on waivers, just kind of keeping my eye on whether or not he progresses forward this week and he can be a third option for CJ Stroud.
Yeah, 100%. It's really start your guys here, and obviously with Collins out, Hutchinson is on the radar to maybe be a solid third option. But until we see it, obviously can't be in lineups just yet. But should be a good matchup against Green Bay this week, whose secondary who's been going back and forth really with good and bad in their secondary so far this season, Brett.
All right, so we go to our next matchup here, Seattle at Atlanta. Zach, let's start out with the Falcons because Kirk Cousins has just been on an absolute tear in the last bunch of weeks. I think he becomes a quarterback 1.
Yeah, I think when you look at Cousins and just the capability to go off, and I actually started him last week. I was feeling really good about him, but the fact that he was going up against Carolina, who you go back and forth, is their run defense going to be bad today, or is their pass defense going to be bad today? Last week, it was their run defense that struggled, and Algier and Bijan were able to go to town on it, and Kirk did not get as many points as he would have wanted to. I think this one's going to be more of a shootout type of game, Brett. 2 high-powered offenses, 2 defenses that haven't been really all that great so far this year. And I look at that in the end and say, all right, well, you're going to look at some main guys in Kirk Cousins. You also have the main guys in Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Darnell Mooney. If he's healthy as well, Kyle Pitts is in your lineup. I even think like I have Tyler Algier just creeping around there, Brett, in flex radar, but that's only in real deeper leagues. Just based on how many carries he's getting. Like he is getting close to the lead in carries in terms of him and Bijan Robinson. Worrying for Bijan owners, but also like if you got Algier, like he's another guy to just put on the radar, because I think on the goal line they may give it to him more than Bijan. They're also like short yardage. He's going to get some good touches. So they've kind of gone with that in the last couple of weeks, and it's worrying as a Bijan owner, but it's also like, yeah, you could take advantage of some value in Algier right now, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think you become some sort of flex option there. And as far as the rest of the guys, like you're starting your guys there, Darnell Mooney, still a solid flex option. Very high end flex option, I would say right now, based on, just the amount of targets he's been able to get and what he's been able to do, even in those short yardage kind of areas where it's the screen game and things like that. Still been able to find himself some open space. Algier has been able to kind of carve himself out a role where it's not eating into Bijan's production as well. So, yeah, just kind of start your guys. On the other side of the ball, Geno, I think, is probably a fringe starter, probably more a streaming option than anything, if not a super flex option. Kenneth Walker, you're rolling out there. Charbonnet is a low-end flex, just based on the fact that they've been using him in the red zone, and there is the potential that he falls into the end zone. DK, you're rolling out there. JSN, you're rolling out there as well. Lockett, to me, is also a flex option.
Yeah, completely fair. Agree on all fronts, and solid enough matchup for this Seattle offense that just needs to get back to the basics. I mean, they've sputtered as a team, Brett. And obviously coming off of a painful division loss to San Francisco last week, they're looking to bounce back. So I'm expecting a lot of points on the board here, and that should be good for fantasy owners this week.
All right, so let's jump into our next matchup here. Detroit at Minnesota. Zach, I think that Aaron Jones right now is questionable, or he is officially listed as questionable for this game. If he can't go, are you starting Ty Chandler?
I can go both ways on it, Brett. I think when you look at the Detroit run defense, they've been so good the last couple of years. And you say, all right, well, they're the best run defense in the league. I also look at the side of that Aiden Hutchinson's out right now, Brett, and out for the year. And does that drop this Detroit run defense into a middle of the pack one? I understand that there's other guys on the defensive line, of course, for Detroit that make it a really strong run defense. And it's not just Aiden Hutchinson, but that's a big loss for them. And I think when you look at that, the carries that Chandler will get, that's more of the reason. The volume that he'll get is good enough for me to trust him. And I also think, like, if they're on the goal line, like, they're giving it to him, he's going to be the guy over a Cam Akers who's just coming in. But it is a tough one to look at and really feel confident about it based on how good Detroit's run defense has been. Everybody else, though, you're starting a Jefferson, of course. Hawkinson's not going to play this week, Brett. Looked close to maybe coming back, but they're going to ease him in a little bit. I would say Sam Darnold is a really solid starting option this week based on how terrible Detroit's secondary has been. I know they looked really good last week against the Cowboys, but their passing defense has been abysmal. So Sam Darnold, who's been lights out so far this year, could have a really good game in this one against Detroit. And then, of course, his top weapons in Addison and Jefferson, they will be in your lineups. Obviously, Jefferson and Addison more of a flex option, but based on the matchup against Detroit, I'm full go with this Minnesota offense.
Yeah, I think this could be one of those higher scoring games that we see this week as two different foes kind of go at it, and you kind of can see the opposite effect in a lot of those. I think this is one where a guy like Aiden Hutchinson not being in there might have an effect on Darnold, like you said. I think he's a very solid super flex option right now this week. And it really just comes down to him having more time to operate. And it's the reason why I do like Ty Chandler as a potential option if Aaron Jones can't go. That said, like you said, Addison, Jefferson, you're putting both of them in. And, listen, I think that a guy like a Jalen Naylor has sort of warranted the microscope a little bit more just because he's found himself quite a bit open on some of those bigger plays. And so in deeper leagues, like a guy that definitely can be added because Sam Darnold has figured out ways to just find him and find him deep also.
Yeah, 100%. And on the other side for Detroit, like, it's start your guys. I think pretty simple there. You got your main guys, of course, in the running back room with Gibbs and Montgomery. Of course, you got Laporta, as well as the wide receiver room in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. But I think the question right now, Brett, is Sam Laporta, who we just have not seen enough of so far this year. And I think he's the biggest question mark, I would say, of the pass catchers and in this passing offense. But overall, like he needs to kind of figure it out, and they're going to want to get him more involved. It's not an easy matchup though against this Minnesota secondary with the safeties who have been really, really strong so far this season.
I got 3 words for you. It's tight ends, and the tight end position has just been a complete nightmare, super, super thin as far as the talent goes this year. And so, yeah, what choice do you have? You kind of just have to roll Laporta out there. If you got him, you put a high value into him because you had to go up and get him in the draft. So, yeah, you're rolling forward with them. And, again, it's not just Laporta who's going through it. There are multiple tight ends. We could talk Mark Andrews, for hours and hours, and we have. Laporta is sort of falling into the same sort of trap where it's like, okay, well, they're feeding a ton of guys, and Laporta has been sort of the odd man out. And yeah, he'll get his at some point. I'm not worried. The whole position's just kind of been skewed where, everybody was saying go for the tight end early. It's sort of been the opposite here in at least the first 6 weeks of this season.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so let's go to the next matchup. Saquon Barkley travels back to MetLife Stadium to take on his old team, the New York Giants. Zach, I'm kind of looking forward to this game just for that storyline alone. Is this going to be one of those games where Saquon scores like 4 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns, has one of those like Alvin Kamara-like performances?
Well, for Giants fans' sake, I think they hope not. I think though, based on the injuries and who's going to be in and out, obviously Giants got some questionable tags on the defensive side. It could be a big Saquon Barkley day. I think what the Eagles need, they're coming off the bye now, and they're just looking for anything to really feel good about. It has not been strong so far this year for this team. They are not the team that we see as like Super Bowl contenders. Brett, the Eagles need a big bounce back here. And I think when you look at their offense overall, like they just need to figure things out. It could be a get right game for Philadelphia here. I think it's as simple as start your guys with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Of course, Saquon, Jalen Hurts, they're all in there. Dallas Goedert is out. So obviously the more targets I feel like for Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown respectively, I think that's pretty much it for Philadelphia. It's a huge game for them though, to really just right the ship just a little bit. It's kind of gotten out of control, and their coach is on is really one bad comment away from being fired, Brett. So not the greatest time in Philadelphia as an Eagles guy right now.
Yeah, I think, listen, it's fair to say that he's on the hot seat. It's just one of those cities that's always going to come after their coaches and hold them accountable. And he went after the fans last week. Let's be real. He went after the fans, and not sure exactly what was said, but you can see that he was holding his hand up to his ear after they had won to almost be like, hey, are you still talking? Yeah, it's going to continue to follow him. It's a storyline that's going to hit probably for the rest of the season, just to follow that team around. But yeah, I think that the biggest news coming out of today was that Dallas Goedert isn't playing. And it really just means that Monta and AJ Brown are going to get fed a ton. Calcaterra, I don't know that you can play him at all. Who's going to come in as de facto tight end one to replace Goddard. But yeah, as far as Saquon goes, this could be one of those games where he tries to make a statement, and I'm talking about Sirianni, that is, saying, he's ours. And I can see once they get anywhere near the red zone, they just try to feed Barkley as much as they can to get him quite a few scores.
Yeah, 100%. And on the other side for the Giants, I think the best news that we've got this week, Malik Neighbors is back, Brett. I mean, what a good feeling. I mean, we're both Malik Neighbors owners in different leagues. Like, it's kind of just like, this is awesome. Like the number one wide receiver, like he's been so good so far this season. It's great to have him back, and this should be a great matchup against Philly's secondary that may be without Darius Slay this week, Brett. So like it could be just all go and go to town, Malik Neighbors. I'm excited for that, as well as you look at the running back room. Singletary's going to be back this week. I don't know if he's going to be 100% healthy though, Brett. You kind of just have to keep an eye on it the next couple of days to see how like the progress is going, and then make a decision if you really trust Singletary as the number one, or is Tyrone Tracy still going to get some carries, Brett? Because he looked really, really good while Singletary was out. Other than that, like Wan'Dale Robinson's a flex play, and that's really it for the Giants.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for me, Daniel Jones, super flex option. You're rolling Neighbors out there. Wan'Dale's a flex option as well. I think it just bumps Darius Slayton down off the radar. I don't think you're starting him, but you're certainly not dropping him, because I still think there's some sort of role that he has there. Theo Johnson has kind of just been a dud this year as far as, the passing game. He received only 3 targets after receiving 5 targets the previous week, which is the season high for him. And so you can kind of just drop him in redraft leagues and hold on to him and pray in the dynasty community. And I'll be part of that drum circle right there with you. Devin Singletary is going to play this week. Dable came out and said Tyrone Tracy is going to get significant time. Not sure how to totally read into that. I think that Tracy's probably more of a flex option, and that probably puts Singletary right around the same range. I don't know that you can confidently start either guy, because I think it's going to kind of just be a 50-50 split.
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right, so let's jump right to the next match here. The LA Rams welcome the Davante Adams list Las Vegas Raiders. And Zach, let's start out with the Raiders, because I think we can talk about Brock Bowers all we want, that he is going to be the focal point of this offense. I think that's been super, super clear. Does anybody else come out as a potential option here in this offense?
Brock Bowers, Brett. I think it's just going to be mainly him. And then I think when you look at like a Jacoby Myers, going to get some targets and going to get a good target share, like that's fair. I think when you look
at be noted,
go ahead.
Should be noted that Jacoby Myers this week is listed as doubtful. So yes, we talk about Jacoby going forward, but this week probably not.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And that's going to be like the focus is for this week. It's going to be Brock Bowers. The future, it's going to be both him and Jacoby Myers. And then I think in the running back room, like it's just you go every which way. They got like 3 guys in there that can put up a touchdown or put up some yards. I don't feel confident with any of them. Madison, Zamir White, Amir Abdullah's involved now too. Like it really is a crapshoot of a backfield. You just don't know who's going to really step up in each game. But for this week, Brett, Brock Bowers, who got a lot of targets last week, and just continues to roll right now, as expected, really to start the year. This is a guy that we had an eye on. Didn't expect him to put up this amount of numbers, but he's one of the freak talents coming out of the SEC. So not too surprising in the end that he's getting a good workload.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think Brock Bowers right now is just the only sure thing that we have in this. Trey Tucker, who's going to be the number one receiver this week, had 2 targets this week, didn't catch either of them. And so I can't really be so confident in that. And therefore, I can't even be confident in putting O'Connell in the super flex spot. So for me, I'm probably staying away this week from him, and it's kind of just a wait and see. And we got to see what this is moving forward with this offense. Because yeah, it's kind of doom and gloom right now. It's going to go right through the running back, but we don't really know which ones, so can't really play any of them.
Yeah, definitely fair. And when you look at the other side for the Rams, pretty simple. Of like Matt Stafford is a super flex option. With matchup being really good against Vegas. Kyren Williams, though, is like a really, really strong option here, of course. And I think Cooper Kupp is coming back this week, Brett, if I'm not mistaken. So some good news here, and I'm expecting one of those first couple of drives, or even the first drive. He comes back and he gets like 6 targets from Matthew Stafford in typical fashion there. But so for that reason, like, should be a good week for him. Great matchup against Vegas, who's really struggled against any wide receiver so far this year.
Yeah, at this rate, it looks like he is going to play, but he is officially listed as questionable, Cooper Kupp. And so obviously monitor what's going on heading into the inactives at 11:30 Eastern time. But I think that if he does go, yeah, he could probably get a pretty good workload there. I don't really see them like easing him in. I think they'll kind of just have to throw the ball in his direction. I don't really see anybody else in this offense outside of Kyren Williams making a big impact. Matt Stafford, probably a lower end superflex option.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so let's jump to the last 4:05 game here. It is Carolina at Washington. Zach, we got to talk Jaden Daniels because the dude is just a complete baller. A top 5 option right now.
Yes, because of his running ability. Like, he just keeps rolling with his legs, and the arm as well is just panning out. Even in a loss, he looks really, really good. So he's definitely a automatic starter in fantasy lineups right now. The rest of the guys, Brian Robinson looks like he's going to be coming back this week, so that's very good news for Robinson owners like myself, because the matchup is glorious. They always, we as fantasy owners always look forward to the Carolina matchup. That's just the one this year to look forward to, and Washington gets them this week. So your main guys of Robinson, Daniels, and Terry McLaurin are all in your lineup this week, surrounded by a bunch of flex options around, with maybe Zach Ertz and starting at tight end if you really need them. And then you also have some other guys in maybe an Austin Eckler who's hanging in the area, Luke McCaffrey hanging in the air, like those kind of guys. Just based on the matchup, it's perfect this week against Carolina, Brett.
Yeah, I'm with you. Noah Brown's another guy I would add to that potential list of guys who are on the radar. Zach Ertz certainly is a really good streaming option this week. And then obviously you're rolling Daniels out. Would caution as far as the running back situation, just because, yeah, while it looks like Robinson's coming back, should be noted he only practiced limited all week. He didn't log a full practice, and so we'll see. It's questionable, and if he goes, like, he set it and forget it. If he can't go, I think Austin Eckler becomes a must start as probably a higher end running back too.
Yeah, definitely fair. And on the other side for Carolina, you got your main guys in Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Johnson, and I think that's about it. I don't really trust anybody else in Carolina right now, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, Jatavian Sanders like a potential streaming option, but again, it really just comes down to the fact that the tight end position is so weird this year that you kind of just are like, okay, well, hopefully Andy Dalton can get this guy to fall into the end zone. But I don't trust it. I just think that it's a guy that shouldn't be overlooked.
Definitely fair.
All right, so jumping into the next matchup here, Kansas City at San Francisco. Zach, I think this is the first real week that I can say Patrick Mahomes is not a quarterback one.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy to say. That's just where we're at, though. There's just better options right now, Brett. A lot of streamers, a lot of just backups that have turned to starters in fantasy, and that's where we're at. So it pushes Mahomes down, and obviously the matchup against San Fran on the road, not great. But I did look at this and say, how in the world are they going to make Patrick Mahomes an underdog again? With San Francisco 2-point favorites at home in this one, Brett. That's crazy. It really is. They continue to doubt Patrick Mahomes, and every single time he's proved them wrong. But they go to San Fran again, and yes, San Fran's feeling good. They got a lot of guys back, and just the injury status is a bit better than it has been for San Fran over the last couple of weeks. Even so, it's Patrick Mahomes. So, but just looking at both of these teams, the main guys that you're looking at is Travis Kelce as well as Kareem Hunt, who Hunt has been really, really good, stepping in as now officially, I would say, as the number one back in Kansas City. So both of them are going to be in lineups this week, Kelce and Hunt. After that, yeah, Juju's on a flex radar. You got some other guys, Xavier Worthy's on a flex radar, but nobody that I'm like really truly confident in starting if it's not Travis Kelce or Kareem Hunt, Brett.
I agree. I think that on all fronts, it's pretty much the same for me. Like Mahomes is probably, you got a better option, I think. This week, really tough matchup, obviously. In Superflex leagues, you're starting him like it's Patrick Mahomes, you're starting him. But as far as the one quarterback leagues, I think that there's just so many options that are out there. I think that there's also a lot of options that are out there on waivers this week that could potentially be really good in your league. But yeah, starting Kelce, Worthy, Smith-Schuster, definitely both flexes. And like you said, Kareem Hunt, you're starting him if you have him because he is the one running back there. On the other side of the ball, I think it's just kind of start your guys. Jordan Mason was cleared from the injury report, so you can go just must start him, set it and forget it. As far as Ayuk and Debo, like you're putting them in. George Kittle as well. And then Brock Purdy, I think right now is probably a lower end quarterback one because it is a tough matchup against the Chiefs. But I think you still can play him with some confidence.
Yeah, 100% agree on all fronts, and should be a real strong matchup between two of the Titans right now in the NFL.
Yeah, it's kind of fun because this is the only game that is going to be at 4:25, so there will be a point where for about a half hour you have the end of the game, and it is just one Kansas City team going against one San Francisco 49ers team. So that'll be kind of cool. It's almost like a primetime game before the primetime game. But we'll get into the primetime game because we've been talking about it at length off of this podcast. And so now we get to talk about it on the podcast. The Jets and Davante Adams travel into Pittsburgh, and it looks like Russell Wilson is going to be the starting quarterback. Zach, let's actually start with the Pittsburgh side of things. And we got to talk about the fact that Russell Wilson is coming in. Looks like George Pickens kind of hinted at that. And Mike Tomlin hasn't really actually come out and said Russell Wilson is starting the game over Justin Fields. But we've seen the comments from Justin Fields himself. George Pickens earlier today comes out and says, I've been working on after practice with Russ because it's his first start. And so that all of a sudden came out there and everyone was like, well, it's his first start. There you go, Russell Wilson. So we're going to just assume that Russell Wilson is the starter. What's your outlook on his offense, though, with him there?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that, you're like, oh, well, Thanks, George Pickens. He's been good in front of a microphone recently, Brett. He's
Yeah,
having a good
really.
couple of weeks. But for George Pickens himself, you look at this week and you probably downgrade him to more of like a flex option rather than anything more than that, Brett. Just because the Jets defense really strong, obviously so far this season in terms of the secondary. Not going to make it easy on Pickens. I think the Steelers are going to rely more on Najee Harris this week, especially in the run game. And yes, they're going to pass the ball with Russell Wilson, try and air it out a little bit more than they have been when it comes to Pickens and Freiermuth, as well as just what it's been with Justin Fields. It's been more focused on the run game and his legs in Justin Fields. I think it's more focused on the passing game here, but they are going to have to rely on the run game to settle things down. I think Najee gets a solid week here against the Jets front that's struggled so far this year, Brett. But other than that, like Najee, Pat Freiermuth, and George Pickens, those are the three on my radar this week, and that's really based on matchup with Freiermuth and Pickens definitely downgraded a bit just based on how good the Jets secondary has been.
Yeah, I agree. I think Najee got cleared this week, and so I think that knocks Jaylen Warren's value down quite a bit where you're probably not starting him. So for me, it's Najee's probably a volume-based running back too. Pickens probably is a solid flex option, I would say, and then Freiermuth's probably on that fringe, tight end 1, tight end 2 range there. Russ is probably a super flex option. I'm not sure how high I put him on that super flex, range though. Probably in the middle, but I don't know that I'm saying, okay, he's going to be the top end the way that I would have said it had it been Justin Fields, because I think the legs that Justin Fields has versus what Russ has are two completely different stories. So I think it's a little bit less of the legs and a little bit more of the throwing. But yeah, like you said, tough matchup, obviously, with the Jets secondary. Good players. They haven't been amazing thus far to start the season. It's kind of just been hit and miss, except for that Patriots game where it was just like, okay, they can't get anything going. But yeah, as far as the Jets side, I mean, it's a whole new ballgame for them. And obviously, we talked Devontae and Garrett and who's it going to be. And obviously, Devontae is the one. And is that not Garrett? I think both of these guys are probably solid, high-end wide receiver 2s. I don't know that I can proclaim either one of them a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. But for me, high-end wide receiver 2, you're starting both of them. That much is for sure. But I don't know that you can say that they're going to be in the upper echelon, because I think they're both going to be able to have solid contributions. Breece is a solid running back 1, obviously. And I think Lazard just kind of comes off of that flex radar a little bit. Probably more of the low end flex option. Conklin completely comes off of the fringe, though. And so I don't know that he's a streaming option for me this week. Steelers have been pretty good tight ends thus far. And Aaron Rodgers, like I said, I think he's probably moved up from that quarterback 18 to 20 range to that 13 to 15 range. And so for me, he's a super flex option. I'm not starting him in one quarterback league, but certainly gets a nice boost here.
Yeah, I think it's a bad matchup right now for the Jets this week. Heading into Pittsburgh, it's obviously a tough defense, the second best defense in the NFL this season based on points per game allowed, excuse me. And you look at it, I think when you look at that, the matchup, it's going to be Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Devontae Adams for me in just regular 10 or 12 team redraft leagues. Other than that, yeah, there's some guys on the flex radar in deeper leagues, and Rodgers is on the super flex options. But other than that, traditional leagues, 10 to 12 team leagues, it's got to be just the main three guys in Hall, Wilson, and Adams this week.
All right, so we move on to the next matchup here in Monday Night Football. It's a doubleheader. We got one game on television. The other one is a streaming exclusive on ESPN Plus. Well, let's start out with the one on TV. It starts 8:15, Baltimore at Tampa Bay. Zach, we'll start out with the Ravens. I kind of think it's back to what we were saying a couple weeks ago about like start your guys, except for maybe the tight end position, where I think it's sort of just been no back and forth. We talked literally the other day with our sister who went out, got the Mark Andrews trade, started him each and every week. He didn't do anything. Finally, she said, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to put him on the bench for a week. Mark Andrews all of a sudden has a good week. And so I'm not really sure what you're doing with Isaiah Likely or Mark Andrews. If I'm a Mark Andrews owner, I would be starting him, but that's me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm starting him also. I think you kind of just have to go off what you've seen the last couple of weeks, and it's trending towards all right. Mark Andrews could be back. The return is here, and I think when you look at that, he'll be in lineups this week. And in my mind, the rest of the guys, of course, Lamar, Derrick Henry, and Zay Flowers, all in there. It's a bit of a strange matchup against Tampa Bay, whose secondary has been good one week, bad another. Defense has been good one week, bad another. You can kind of go any which way. But I think when this Baltimore offense is rolling like it does, there's really no stopping them. And I think in the end, when you look at that, you got to start all your guys with confidence here.
Yeah, and I think that a guy that definitely has been making an impact the last bunch of weeks is Rashad Bateman. He's out there in like 85% of leagues. I think it should be way less than that. I think that, it's a guy that definitely should be out and added in pretty much every league, and really just track record for itself has spoken. And so certainly a guy that moving forward, like I think that Zay Flowers can't be the only one to get the ball when Lamar throws it. And we saw Mark Andrews come to be a thing. And I think Rashad Bateman's becoming a thing again, at least from what he was a couple of years ago. So yeah, that's a guy that I'm keeping on my radar as well. On the Bucs side, I mean, it's kind of, again, start your guys. I think Cade Otton finds himself on that potential streaming options pretty much every week. We talk about that he's a streaming option. I think that this is the same name of the game for him. Godwin, Evans, you're starting both of them. I'm a little bit curious as far as what happens in the running back room. Rachaad White is questionable right now. He was limited in practice, and obviously, like we said, it's all about tomorrow's report and whether or not it's going to be him going, or if not, then Bucky Irving. I think that if Rachaad White is starting, then you're playing him. I think that if Rachaad White is not playing, you're putting Bucky Irving in. But I think you're staying away from Bucky Irving in your lineup if Rachaad White is playing. That's kind of where I see it going. Sean Evans, everybody was trying to get him. I don't know that I'm putting him in my lineup right now. And again, if Rachaad White is out, I still don't know that I can really put Sean Evans in. I'm just against it. I don't know that we will see that sort of a game. I think it's going to be a tighter game. Obviously, Ravens defense is a good defense. And so for me, I think that it's, either White or Irving, but not Tucker.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And I think you really said it all there. And in who you're starting in this one, Evans, Godwin, as well as some of the running back room based on health. And of course, Cade Otton has a real good matchup this week, Brett. Baltimore's been terrible against tight ends so far this season, and he's definitely a really good option to have on Monday night against Baltimore.
All right, so let's jump to the final matchup here in the Week 7 slate. Los Angeles Chargers at the Arizona Cardinals, 9 p.m. exclusively on ESPN Plus. Zach, let's start out with the Chargers. I think that for me, it's really just J.K. Dobbins and then maybe Ladd McConkey as a flex play. I don't know that I can have that much confidence in Josh Palmer, in Quentin Johnston, Kamani Vidal, or even Justin Herbert, where he's probably more of a super flex play. What do you think?
I think when you look at it, J.K. Dobbins, I would say maybe a Ladd McConkey's hanging around. that's kind of it. I think Herbert is more of a super flex option. But yeah, in regular 10 or 12 team leagues, it's going to be Dobbins and McConkey. Really, after that, I don't feel anybody could be in a lineup this week. I feel like there's just better options.
Yeah, and then as far as the other side of the ball, again, like start your guys. We talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. A lot last week, and so now this week he obviously gets injured. Doesn't look like he's going to play. Then all of a sudden he sheds the non-contact jersey today, so it looks like he will play. So I would just say start him with confidence. Start Trey McBride with confidence. Kyler Murray is probably a lower end quarterback one, but you're playing him nonetheless. And then it's James Conner, and what is he's in? I mean, like he looked like he was just kind of banged up last week, and it didn't look as effective. But for me, I think that James Conner's status probably would have changed if Marvin wasn't playing, where he would have been up a lot more. For me, I still think you're playing him, as regular.
Yeah, simple. Start your guys here and really just trust them. They this Arizona team just looking to figure things out, and obviously it's been back and forth the last couple of weeks. So they should have Harrison back, and that should be good news for Kyler Murray in this offense. But yeah, start your guys, and they're at home on Monday night against the Chargers, so should be a good one there.
All right, so let's head into the final stretch here as we head into our lock of the week. These are guys that you are going to start in your lineup that are ranked in the 20th or outside. Zach, last week it was a bit of a dud for me. I took Chris Olave, who got hurt, and you took Jalen Tolbert. So negative 0.5 PPR points for Olave, and a lot of owners were very disappointed with that. Then he goes down with injury, and he's ruled out for the game with a concussion. And so, yeah, I think this is the first time we've actually had a lock of the week that is finished with negative points. And so, listen, I'll take the loss. It's all good. I'm still leading 3-2 in the standings, but it's your pick here on lock of the week to go first.
Yeah, definitely, Brett. And I'm going to go with a guy that I actually thought it was surprising that people put him in the 20s. And yes, the matchup could focus on the return of Saquon Barkley and just a big game for him in New York. However, this guy has owned the New York Giants in the 5 times he's played against them in his career, and it's Devonta Smith. He's had 4 touchdowns in those 5 games, and this offense needs to get rolling, like in every facet, passing, running, whatever it is, they need to figure it out. So for that reason, I think it's just going to be an all-around performance by Philadelphia, not just focused on Saquon. And I think Devonta Smith is going to be a real standout guy this week, and he's my lock of the week. Glorious matchup against the Giants, and like I said, he's had their number in his 5 meetings against them in his NFL career.
Yeah, for me, it's really just based on the fact that Marvin shedded his non-contact jersey, as I just talked about. And so Marvin Harrison Jr. right now is my lock of the week. Certainly should have been higher in the rankings. I understand that he wasn't based on the injury. But this is a guy who's just basically going to come out, and it doesn't really matter that the LA defense is really good. They haven't faced Marvin. And so, listen, Kyler's been able to search for him, find him. So I'm starting him with confidence. He's my lock of the week.
Definitely fair.
All right, so we jump to the final segment here, our ones to watch. These are guys who will end up being waiver targets next week. Zach, last week, it was awful for you and for me. We picked Braylon Allen, or you picked Braylon Allen, who finished with 0.8 PPR points, to my Jalen Polk, who finished with 1.4 PPR points. Not really a good production from either one of our guys, but I took the win nonetheless to go up 3-2 in the standings. And so, Zach, I'm going to go first here. I'm taking Juju Smith-Schuster, who is owned in 40% of leagues. Listen, anytime you have Patty Mahomes as your quarterback, you're in the positive there. I think that looking forward, Juju is going to be able to get a big target share. I think that a lot of teams have started to say, okay, let's try to figure out Travis Kelce here and Xavier Worthy, this shiny new toy who can get down the field real quickly. Juju's been able to get himself open in that mid-range, so that 10 to 20 yard range. And I think that that's really been where the bread and butter of finding Patty Mahomes was. And for me, I think that there's the opportunity. A lot of targets go to Juju over the next bunch of weeks, and certainly a guy who will be owned in more than 50%, probably even next week.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Juju, I think all you have to really look at is what he was able to do against New Orleans and the target share that he got in that game on Monday night before the bye week. And he was just peppered with targets in the end and kind of solidified himself, it looks like, as the number one without Rashee Rice. So I think it's a really smart choice there, Brett. On the other side, for me, I'm going to go with a guy who's owned in 46% of leagues. We got some high ones this week, but this one is based on a trade we talked about earlier. Amari Cooper going to the Bills. That means who's the number one? It's Jerry Jeudy, who's just still hanging around there and still could get some good targets. And he, even though last week was not great, they played the Eagles, he still had a catch for 35 yards. It's proved to me that he still can be a deep threat. He could be a short threat. I think that could be a big target for Deshaun Watson. Him and Jerry Jeudy, as well as David Njoku, both guys like really could be the go-to options in this offense for Deshaun Watson, as long as he's still playing quarterback right now in Cleveland. But Jerry Jeudy, I don't know how it's not 50% of leagues. I understand that, yeah, it's Cleveland, but in the end, like, this guy is definitely a top target right now in this offense and should be rostered in plenty of leagues.
Yeah, it's certainly fair. I think that even, just both of our guys are going to be their number one receivers in their offenses and should be rostered as such. And so, yeah, the fact that they're both out there in like 54% of leagues is kind of nuts. And so I think that there was a central theme in this week's ones to watch. Definitely both guys who should be added. All right, Zach, that'll do it for this week. I think that we covered a lot of bases here. Excited to see how the new look Buffalo Bills look. Excited to see what new look New York Jets look like. Anything that you are looking forward to this weekend?
Both those. I think when you see a star pairing in Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams, obviously we're here in New York. Should be good to really see that. I also am curious to see the return of Saquon here. Obviously a big story heading into this weekend. Us in New York have heard a lot about it so far. So looking forward to Sunday and seeing how that one goes.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to see if Jaden Daniels can continue the hot streak and absolutely carve up the Carolina defense and what that looks like and how much they can win by. But that'll do it for us. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Podcast, give us a thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is darkest before the dawn. We shall rise yet again. Let's go Yankees. Let's go Mets. And we will catch you on